The wind screamed across the train platform like a lonely creature, tugging at the hem of Lila Mae Carter's second-hand dress as she clutched the small carpetbag that held everything she could claim in this life: 2 dresses, a chipped comb, and her mother's wooden spoon. The other mail-order brides had already been collected by eager husbands, leaving behind a swirl of dust and perfume and laughter that did not belong to her. The men had looked her over, quietly, politely, some not so politely, and passed her by as though she were an unsellable trinket on a merchant's shelf. Too small, too thin, too timid, too plain, they whispered. One man even murmured, "She looks like she ain't eaten in days." And so she stood alone, the last unwanted bride, praying that the men who'd written her, Mr. Thorne Braxton, a rancher out in the barren stretch of Red Valley, would indeed come for her. "I'm worth not much, sir," she had written in her letter, her trembling hand leaving sweat marks on the paper, "but I can cook." It was the only skill she believed made her worth the stamp it took to send the letter. The station master eyed her pityingly before turning away. Dusk crept across the horizon. And then, hoofbeats. Slow, heavy, echoing like a heartbeat across dry earth. The man who arrived was taller than she'd imagined, broader, sun-scarred, with shoulders carved by years of lifting hay bales and a face that rarely remembered how to smile. Thorne Braxton swung down from his horse with a stiffness that spoke of both age and hardship. His eyes, gray as winter clouds, swept over her with a quiet hesitance, as if he expected her to refuse him. "Miss Lila?" he asked, touching the brim of his weather-beaten hat. She nodded, her voice stuck in her throat. He cleared his own awkwardly. "You didn't have to come if you changed your mind." Her breath hitched. He thought she would back out. "No, sir," she whispered. "I came because you asked. And I can cook." He stared at her then, really stared, as though he'd been handed something fragile and didn't know how to hold it. Then, "I guess we'd best get you home." The ride to the Braxton Ranch stretched across miles of silence and dying sunlight. Everything looked desolate, lonely, as if the land itself mourned something lost long ago. When they arrived, she saw a house that looked too big for one man, windows unlit, porch sagging slightly. A place that had forgotten laughter. "I'm sorry it ain't much," Thorne muttered. "It's more than I ever had," she answered truthfully, stepping down. Inside, dust coated the tables, dishes were piled like leaning towers, and the fireplace was cold. Lila felt no fear, only a strange, warm purpose blooming in her chest. She rolled up her sleeves. "I'll need flour, sir," she said, "and firewood." Thorne blinked, bewildered. "You just got here. A house needs a meal before it can be called a home." He stared again, this time longer, then went outside without a word. When he returned with wood, she already had dough rising, vegetables chopped, and a pot simmering with wild herbs she'd found near the well. The smell filled the house slowly at first, then richly, curling into corners that had long been empty. Thorne leaned against the doorway, watching her, his eyes softening as though she were performing some quiet miracle. "Nobody cooks like that," he said under his breath. "Well," she murmured, cheeks warming, "nobody wanted me, so I had to learn to be useful." Something flickered in him, anger, not at her, but at every soul who'd made her believe that. When the meal was ready, they sat in awkward silence. He took one bite, then stopped, frozen. This is," she panicked. "Is it too salty?" "Too." "It's perfect," he said roughly. "It's the best thing I've eaten in years." She exhaled, tension slipping from her shoulders for the first time in months. That night, she slept in the small guest room, listening to the creak of the ranch house settling around her like old bones remembering warmth. Thorne stood alone by the dying fire, staring into the flames. A bride he hadn't expected to truly arrive. A woman who thought herself worthless. Yet somehow, in just a few hours, she had filled his home with the smell of hope. And far beyond the ranch, in the dark plains, a storm gathered, one that would test them both in ways neither yet understood. The sun rose the next morning with an eerie stillness, painting the sky in bruised shades of violet and orange. Lila woke before Thorne, habit born from years in boarding kitchens, and padded quietly into the main room. She had expected him to be snoring or gone to the barns, but instead, she found him asleep in the chair by the fireplace, boots still on, head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. She bit her lip, staring. He looked younger when he slept. Softer. as though life's burdens loosened their grip for a few hours. She covered him with a blanket and moved silently to the kitchen. By the time the first rays hit the windows, the table was set with biscuits, eggs, and fresh coffee. The scent woke Thorn before she touched his shoulder. He blinked, confused, eyes drifting to the table, then to her. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," she said gently. "Cooking makes me feel like I matter." He hesitated, then spoke so quietly she almost missed it. "You matter just fine without it." The words struck deeper than he realized. She swallowed hard, turning away under the pretense of checking the oven. After breakfast, Thorn gave her a tour of the ranch, vast acres of dust, scattered cattle, and old fences begging for repair. He apologized for everything, the broken gate, the leaking roof, the empty barns. She stopped him with a small smile. "I didn't come for perfection, sir. I came for a place to belong." He opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded once, sharply, as though the words meant more than she knew. Days passed. Lila cleaned, cooked, sewed torn shirts. Thorn repaired the porch, the roof, the fence. Slowly, quietly, the ranch began to breathe again. But one evening, as the sky darkened into an ominous swirl, a rider arrived, dust-covered, breathless, shouting Thorn's name. "Braxton. Storm's comin', a big one. The cattle scatter unless we get moved to the upper pasture." Thorn cursed under his breath. "I'll help," Lila said immediately. "No," he said, firm. "This storm's meaner than any I've seen. You stay inside. But, please," he added softly. "Stay safe." Reluctantly, she obeyed. Hours passed. Wind howled like a wounded beast. Rain assaulted the windows, rattling the house with growing rage. Lila paced, prayed, wrung her hands raw. When a branch slammed into the door, she jumped, heart in her throat. She couldn't stand waiting. She grabbed Thorn's coat from the peg, wrapped it around her small frame, and plunged into the storm. Thunder cracked. Mud sucked at her boots. She followed the distant lantern lights toward the lower fields, only to find chaos. Cattle screamed and scattered. Men fought the wind like enemies. And Thorn was trapped near the ravine's edge, a fallen beam pinning his leg as water surged dangerously close. "Thorn," she screamed, voice swallowed by wind. His head snapped up. "Lila. What in God's name, hold on." She threw herself against the beam. It didn't budge. Rain blinded her. Her arms trembled. She pushed harder, but she was too small, too slight, Lila, go, he shouted. "The ravine's flooding, G.O." "No," she cried, tears mixing with rain. "I won't leave you. I can't, please don't ask me to." Something inside her snapped open, the same part of her that had survived abandonment, cruelty, loneliness. With a cry pulled from the deepest part of her, she heaved the beam with renewed fury. A rider saw her struggle and rushed over. Together they wrenched the timber free. Thorn collapsed into her arms, breath ragged. She held him, shaking. "You fool," he whispered hoarsely. "You brave, stubborn, infuriating woman. Why wouldn't you stay inside?" She sobbed. "Because I matter, sir, and so do you." The storm swallowed the rest of her words, but he heard enough. Later, after the cattle were secured and the men dispersed, Lila helped Thorn limp back to the house. She cleaned his wounds, bandaged his leg, her hands trembling with leftover fear. As she worked, he caught her wrist gently. "Lila." She froze. His eyes softened in a way she had never seen, warm, unguarded, vulnerable. "You weren't the bride nobody wanted," he said. "You were the one I prayed for." Her breath hitched. The room felt suddenly too small, the world too soft. "Thorn," he squeezed her hand. "You're worth more than you'll ever know. And I'm grateful you came." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her smile shone through them. Outside, the storm finally died, leaving behind the fresh scent of rebirth. Inside, for the first time, Thorn Braxton's lonely ranch felt like a home. And Lila realized she had never been unwanted. She had simply been waiting for the one heart strong enough to see her worth. If you want more chapters, deeper romance, or a full series, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next heart-stealing story.